A quiet summons. A hallway emptied. Behind the locked doors of Clarence House, something without precedent took place. King Charles made a call that would send shockwaves through the Commonwealth. What was spoken in hushed tones that evening led to tears, heavy silence, and the fracture of a powerful alliance. So what drove Charles to such a merciless choice? Before we dive deeper into what this truly means for the royal family, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. It started without notice. Shortly after nightfall, staff at Clarence House were ordered to clear the West Wing immediately. Normal clearance protocols were suspended, replaced by red seal directives, rare, and always foreboding. A line of black vehicles slipped in through the rear entrance, bypassing the front courtyard altogether. Inside, one sat Princess Anne, clutching a sealed case stamped with the royal crest. The gravity of the night was unmistakable. Those present later described the tension thickening with each passing moment, a shared but unspoken awareness that what was about to unfold would reach far beyond palace walls. Camilla, however, knew nothing. The Queen Consort spent the evening preparing briefing notes for the upcoming Commonwealth Engagement Summit, unaware that her grip on influence was already slipping. When she sensed the household's strange change in rhythm, the sudden hush, the unusual movement of security, she reportedly began pacing outside the council chamber. Her requests for answers were met only with vague reassurances. No one met her gaze. One staff member likened the scene to watching the ocean retreat just before a tidal wave strikes. Inside the chamber, only 3 advisors were present. Notably absent was Camilla. Charles sat at the head of the long oak table, calm in appearance, yet distant, almost icy. According to palace sources, he opened the meeting, not with pleasantries, but with a single line: "The Commonwealth must be protected." A staffer standing just beyond the door allegedly overheard it. That sentence became the signal that something irreversible had begun. This was no debate. It was a decree. What followed were rapid, tightly managed decisions. Princess Anne, believed to be the architect behind this secret intervention, laid out documents detailing the dangers tied to Camilla's continued role on the council. They cited diplomatic strain, growing discomfort among Commonwealth leaders, and quiet doubts about the monarchy's judgment. Exaggerated or not, the outcome was clear. Charles accepted everything without objection. One nod, 2 signatures, and the fate of the woman once closest to him was sealed. An hour later, Charles left the room. The formal decision had already been transmitted through official channels. His expression was empty. He walked past Camilla in the corridor without slowing. No explanation, no acknowledgement, only the sound of his footsteps fading into silence. Witnesses say Camilla remained motionless, her eyes searching for recognition that never came. And in that stillness, a royal bond once thought unbreakable began to fracture. But what truly took place behind those doors? And why was Camilla deliberately excluded from the very decision that would soon destabilize her royal standing? Once despised and hidden in the margins, Camilla had fought her way to the summit of royal power. She was more than Queen Consort. She was Charles's confidante, his political sounding board, even an influence on Commonwealth policy. So how did she rise so far? And who quietly resented every step upward? Her transformation from scandal to sovereignty was not merely improbable, it was explosive. At first, she was the ghost at the banquet, the shadow behind Charles's failed first marriage, a figure whispered about, kept from the royal spotlight. The public rejected her, the institution even more fiercely. But she waited, she endured. And slowly, through calculated grace and relentless patience, she stepped into view, not only at Charles's side, but behind his decisions. With time, she learned to navigate palace power, positioning herself where it mattered most, just outside official sight, yet always within reach of influence. In those unseen spaces, her true rise began. What few ever realized was how deeply Camilla had embedded herself within the machinery of Commonwealth diplomacy. While Charles delivered speeches and wore the title, Camilla was reportedly the quiet force behind many of the conversations shaping those very narratives. She quietly built relationships with select high commissioners, deploying warmth mixed with careful influence. Among insiders, her ties to several Commonwealth nations, especially across the Caribbean, and parts of Africa, were seen as a silent stronghold of power, one she shaped intentionally, and it did not escape notice. Some labeled it strategy, others, ambition. Within palace walls, however, it became impossible to dismiss. Tension brewed out of sight. It was widely known that Princess Anne, rigidly traditional and fiercely loyal to royal protocol, regarded Camilla's political navigation with deep skepticism. Supporters of Anne said she was safeguarding the institution. Those loyal to Camilla insisted Anne was simply guarding territory. Their rivalry turned into the quiet undercurrent of council meetings. Camilla would put forward daring proposals that bent tradition, only to be met with Anne's cutting, wordless disapproval. One incident, involving contradictory briefing papers ahead of a Pacific Forum summit, reportedly erupted into a shouting match behind the Queen's gallery. An altercation both sides deny, yet one senior aide still reference in hushed tones. But the most consequential resistance came from a different direction. A younger generation, William and Catherine, had grown increasingly uneasy with Camilla's expanding authority in matters they believed would one day be theirs to lead. Charles may have trusted her without question, but their rising position demanded room to breathe, and Camilla's assertiveness was beginning to eclipse them. Behind closed doors, it was whispered that Catherine was repeatedly sidelined during briefings Camilla dominated. Quiet, cutting questions followed. Why was the Queen Consort assuming such a commanding role in affairs traditionally reserved for the monarch and his heir? The discomfort was not confined to the palace. Several Commonwealth leaders had begun voicing concerns privately. Her diplomatic manner was described as distant, at times faintly condescending. One Caribbean ambassador reportedly observed that Camilla spoke as though the empire had never ended. These remarks were never aired publicly, but they were recorded, catalogued, and passed discreetly to the king. For a while, Charles defended her. Yet each criticism eroded the fragile trust the monarchy had struggled to rebuild with the post-colonial world. Camilla's unchecked reach was no longer just unsettling others. It was becoming dangerous for the king himself, and soon the fractures would be impossible to hide. Then came a letter, carefully composed, quietly devastating. Insiders claim it was Catherine, Princess of Wales, who put into words what many only dared to think, that Camilla's involvement in Commonwealth affairs was weakening the crown's authority. Was Catherine the one who struck the match? She had long been viewed as the monarchy's quiet diplomat, poised, restrained, and guided by a sharp, strategic mind. Her ascent was never marked by dramatic declarations, but by moments of clarity that slipped through centuries of rigid protocol. During her travels across the Commonwealth, Catherine had noticed more than she revealed. Cameras captured smiles and gentle waves. Behind closed doors, she absorbed the subtle changes in tone, the hesitation, the unease that often followed Camilla's visits. It wasn't merely a question of style, it was about substance, and Catherine had seen enough. In private, she drafted a letter, not of defiance, but of duty. Duty to the crown, to the future her children would inherit, and to the fragile relationships with nations whose trust hung in the balance. The letter's contents were never released, but one palace insider described it as unflinchingly direct. Catherine reportedly wrote not as Camilla's rival, but as a guardian of the monarchy's evolving role. She warned that Camilla's tone had grown increasingly insensitive, particularly in regions where history's wounds remained raw. Her concern was not personal. It was structural. She cautioned that continued misjudgments could permanently damage ties with key Commonwealth countries and ignite renewed Republican movements. The message was intended for Charles alone, but secrecy rarely survives palace walls. When Charles read the letter, sources say he was shaken, not only by its message, but by who had written it. Catherine almost never involved herself in internal power struggles, let alone documented them. The weight of her warning was undeniable. Before Charles could respond formally, Camilla allegedly discovered the letter. It had been left unattended briefly in the king's study. A single mistake that altered everything. She read it once, then again, and then she stormed out. Her anger was both deeply personal and unmistakably political. She did not see it as concern for the Commonwealth. She saw betrayal, a wound inflicted from inside the family. What followed was an emotional storm behind palace walls. Staff quickly found themselves divided. Some believed Catherine had spoken the truth no one else dared to voice. Others viewed it as a calculated strike against a sitting queen consort. William remained publicly silent. Privately, he was resolute. His support for Catherine sent a message that needed no announcement, yet shook the foundations all the same. He would not retreat. If the monarchy were to endure, it would require restraint, foresight, and discipline, not personal entanglements or influence left to grow unchecked. Unease spread through the corridors. Meetings chilled. Trust was no longer assumed, only tested, and Charles, torn between the woman he chose and the future he had sworn to protect, began to fracture under the strain. With alliances breaking and pressure closing in from every side, he stood at the center of a gathering storm. Then he made the most divisive decision of his reign. There were no warnings, no debates, just one formal letter. Charles did not seek permission. He issued an order. With a single motion, Camilla was removed from the Commonwealth Decision Council, stripped not of her title, but of her power. And the manner in which it was done proved even harsher than the act itself. The choice came swiftly after weeks of growing unrest. Driven to the edge by rival factions, silent collapses within his inner circle, and the fear of leaving behind a fractured legacy, Charles acted with cold resolve. There was no confrontation, no royal assembly, no prolonged airing of grievances. Instead, he called upon his most impartial and trusted private secretary, a man with no visible allegiance to either side, and handed him a sealed command. The letter bore the sovereign's crest. Its finality was unmistakable. In precise formal language, it stated that the Queen Consort was to be relieved, effective immediately, of all duties connected to the Commonwealth Decision Council, a body she had once shaped, and a role she had fiercely championed. It was over. The private secretary, unaccustomed to delivering verdicts of such magnitude, carried the message to Camilla's office with the detached precision of an executioner. He waited for nothing. He offered no comfort. The directive was absolute. This was not negotiable. Those who witnessed the exchange spoke of a freezing stillness, not confusion, but understanding. Camilla read the letter once. Slowly she said nothing. No tears, no questions. She placed it down and stared into empty space. Her world had shifted completely. Within the hour, the palace machinery moved. Quietly, relentlessly, her name vanished from internal Commonwealth briefing lists. Documents once routed to her desk were redirected, or stopped altogether. Diplomatic aides were instructed to send all communications directly to the king's office, and in some cases to Princess Anne, who now assumed discreet control over council affairs. Commonwealth envoys, many still unaware of the internal collapse, received a classified notice. Its wording was clinical, unemotional, absolute. Camilla would no longer take part in Commonwealth policy or strategic decisions. The justification was brief: conflict of interest, no details, no defense, 3 sterile words. Behind the palace's polished courtesy, whispers turned to muted shock. Senior aides who had stood beside Camilla for years watched their access vanish overnight. Her private briefings were canceled without explanation. Staff were reassigned, some dismissed, as if closeness to her had suddenly become dangerous. Yet Camilla said nothing, not to Charles, not to her team. It was as though the palace itself had silenced her. A voice once dominant in council chambers was replaced by something louder: absence. And as the ink dried on her removal, disbelief inside the royal quarters gave way to collapse. She was discovered alone in the private library, hands trembling, mascara streaked across her face. She was crying. Again and again, sources describe a complete emotional breakdown. But were these tears of betrayal or of guilt? The palace had never seen her like this. The woman known for iron composure and impenetrable control was undone. This was not sorrow over lost authority. It ran deeper, more intimate. A junior staff member, arriving with briefing papers that would never be needed, found her curled into an armchair, whispering the same words repeatedly, to no one at all. He didn't even tell me to my face. That single sentence revealed everything. For a woman who had stood beside Charles through scandal, exile, and restoration, To be dismissed so coldly was more than political rejection. It was a personal erasure. It cut deeper than politics. This was personal once. Camilla had been the secret. No one dared speak aloud. Now, she was the disgrace. No one could pretend not to see. For hours, she tried to reach Charles. Calls from her private line went unanswered. Others were declined. Aides said he had withdrawn to Sandringham to think. But some believed he was hiding from a confrontation he knew would unravel him as completely as it had her. In that hollow silence, an unlikely figure stepped forward. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, long regarded as a quiet strength within royal ranks. Sophie reportedly remained with Camilla for nearly 2 hours. Not to justify the decision, but to acknowledge the hurt. Their relationship had always been restrained. Civil, never close. Yet in that moment, Sophie reminded her that even within the monarchy, traces of humanity still surface. But sentiment has never built palaces. Later that evening, Camilla encountered Princess Anne in a corridor outside the East Wing conference room. What should have been a private exchange between senior royals became something else entirely, a wordless standoff. Camilla, eyes red, hands trembling, is said to have whispered, "You could have warned me." Anne did not pause. She did not slow. No apology, no comfort. Only a sharp look that many believe carried years of unspoken judgment. That moment confirmed what some had already feared. The family was not merely divided. It was hollowed out in an effort to control the fallout. The palace imposed strict measures. A rotating team of aides was assigned to Camilla. 1. Harsh shifts. Constant supervision. Phones confiscated at the door. This was not about her safety. It was about the narrative. They knew that if word spread of the Queen Consort's collapse, questions would follow. If she had wielded such influence, how could she be erased so effortlessly? But in the digital age, silence rarely holds. One aide, unnamed, untraceable, spoke, and within 48 hours, reports of a sobbing Camilla reached ears that would never forget them. Her tears, however, softened nothing. They hardened resolve. What came next was not mercy. It was erasure. First, her name disappeared from official meeting records. Then photographs vanished from archived pages. Gradually, her fingerprints on Commonwealth policy were wiped away. The palace did not merely remove Camilla. It attempted to rewrite the past, as if she had never existed there at all. Why such total destruction? Because what followed her collapse was not compassion. It was containment. Emotion could not be the final chapter, so the institution moved swiftly, cleanly, without hesitation. At dawn, a direct order was issued to its departments. Her name was to be stripped from all recent digital files tied to Commonwealth deliberations. Archive teams received quiet instructions: erase her leadership, redact documents where her signature stood beside strategic resolutions, reclassify her influence as advisory only. No announcement, no explanation. Just systematic deletion, a digital execution. Briefing folders bearing her handwritten notes were removed from official storage and replaced with sanitized versions. Policy ideas she had shaped in private meetings were reassigned to others, or labeled unverified. Staff who had served her during her height of power found schedules altered, offices reassigned, some dismissed outright. No reasons offered, none required. Everyone understood. Loyalty to Camilla had become dangerous. The monarchy had chosen its side. Her press team, once responsible for presenting her as a diplomatic bridge to the modern Commonwealth, was silenced. A strict communications directive followed. All inquiries, no comment. Even inside palace walls, mention of Camilla's former role was discouraged. It was as though a firewall had been erected, sealing her influence beneath layers of protocol. Those who questioned it were quietly warned. The message was unmistakable. This was no longer her palace. Into the void stepped Princess Anne, not with sympathy, with precision. She was exactly what the monarchy required in that moment: respected, controlled, and unwaveringly traditional. Anne assumed interim control of Commonwealth affairs with near military efficiency. Meetings resumed, policy continued. Where Camilla had brought disruption, Anne delivered order. This was more than a change in personnel. It was a return to royal orthodoxy: no drama, no scandal, just disciplined continuity, and behind the curtains, a strategy far larger was already unfolding. Its purpose was clear: to recast Camilla's past influence as casual, incidental, and never truly official. Records were quietly altered to fit that version. Past statements were edited. The palace communications team began describing her former involvement as merely supportive, never directive. A role once worn with pride was being reduced, line by line, to a historical footnote. This was not only about stripping Camilla of authority, it was about reshaping the story so it appeared she had never possessed it at all. But as her imprint on policy was being erased, rumors of betrayal took on a darker, more startling dimension, especially after one of Charles's closest aides broke his silence. What truly forced the king's hand? According to a senior palace aide turned whistleblower, it wasn't politics alone. It was personal. Confidential recordings, a leak from a secure royal phone line, and one betrayal too many. All signs pointed to a chilling conclusion. Camilla had crossed a line for weeks. Royal security had been probing a breach in internal communications, an invisible leak buried deep within the palace network. At first, suspicion fell on outsiders, disgruntled former employees, or foreign interests seeking leverage. What they discovered instead stunned even veteran investigators. A recorded call traced directly to Camilla's private study. In it, she reportedly referred to several Commonwealth leaders as increasingly irrelevant, mocking their demands for modern diplomacy and brushing aside their concerns as a drain on the king's time. The tone was not diplomatic. It was not royal. It was dismissive, and dangerously so, but that was only the beginning. The whistleblower revealed more. On multiple occasions, Camilla had allegedly held undisclosed calls with senior envoys from key Commonwealth nations. These were not ceremonial exchanges. They were strategic discussions. She was said to be offering her own positions on sensitive issues, presenting herself as the gatekeeper to Charles's approval. Worse still, none of these interactions were reported to the council. It was influence exercised in silence, bypassing protocol and bypassing the king himself. Then came the moment that shattered any remaining doubt. An IT staff member was intercepted while attempting to delete a batch of emails connected to Commonwealth Council preparations. Those messages, now secured within the Royal Security Archive, reportedly showed Camilla instructing aides to delay briefings, meant for Charles, filter out material she deemed unimportant, and push her own memos to the front of official policy folders. When this evidence was finally laid before Charles during a secluded retreat meant for rest and reflection, he did not respond with shock. He responded with rage. The aide who presented the findings later said Charles stared at the documents for nearly 30 minutes before uttering a single sentence. "She turned what I built into a mockery." That moment changed everything. No longer was this about family discord, public perception, or palace rivalries. It was about the credibility of the monarchy being dragged into the shadow of private ambition. The Commonwealth Decision Council existed to unite, not to be steered from behind closed doors, and in that instant Charles decided, not as a husband, but as king. What followed was immediate. Uncompromising access terminated, orders dispatched, a legacy dismantled. The aide who revealed the truth has since fallen silent. Whether shielded or silenced, no one can say. But his disclosures still echo through palace corridors, because this was not a mistake. It was a calculated betrayal, wrapped in loyalty, concealed by title, and carried out in secrecy. Yet even as the palace attempted to close ranks, the fallout could not be contained. The Commonwealth had questions of its own. Leaders across its nations were caught off guard. Some reacted with relief, others with fury. Camilla's removal was no longer just an internal royal affair. It became an international event, and not everyone accepted the palace's official explanation. Within hours of the announcement reaching diplomatic channels, the quiet broke. Leaked letters from Caribbean and African officials began circulating through elite political circles. Messages filled with shock, confusion, and in some cases, outrage. One West African envoy wrote of disappointment at the lack of consultation, noting that a decision affecting Commonwealth cooperation deserved, at the very least, prior discussion. Another described it more bluntly as a collapse of continuity. In private conversations, more than one High Commissioner questioned whether the king's choice had been driven by political necessity or emotional retaliation. Not every response was hostile. Several ambassadors quietly welcomed Princess Anne's return to overseeing Commonwealth affairs. Her long record of service, her steadiness, and her unbending diplomatic discipline were viewed as a stabilizing presence in a time of upheaval. Some had even believed for years that Anne was better suited to the position Camilla had gained through marriage rather than proven merit. Still, such opinions were rarely spoken aloud. Respect for the institution and for the image of unity the palace worked so hard to preserve kept most voices restrained. Not everyone stayed silent. In Australia, one of the Commonwealth's most outspoken and Republican-leaning nations, the press erupted. Headlines branded the decision a ruthless silencing of a Queen Consort, portraying Camilla's removal as yet another example of the monarchy's double standards toward women. Editorials accused the palace of turning her into a scapegoat, guilty of nothing more than what others before her had done, except this time without a royal bloodline to shield her. The backlash was not overwhelming, but it was sharp. And it exposed a deeper question simmering beneath the surface. Was this truly about protecting the monarchy, or about reshaping who was allowed to hold power within it? Amid the turbulence, one figure moved carefully and without noise. Catherine, she made no public statements, no appearances, no clarifications, yet insiders revealed she had personally written to select Commonwealth leaders, not with grand gestures or official explanations, but with simple handwritten notes expressing her continued commitment to partnership, understanding, and mutual respect. Quiet gestures, but powerful ones. They helped steady the ground Charles had shaken, and they reminded foreign leaders that not everyone inside the palace was consumed by personal conflict, that the future queen understood the value of composure when the crown was under strain. Inside the palace, however, calm had not returned. It had only shifted shape. Senior advisors began speaking in hushed tones about what might come next. Would this ignite a renewed wave of Republican movements? Would nations already burdened by colonial memory use this controversy as a reason to step further away? These were not abstract fears. They were real, growing, and tracked closely by Charles's most trusted political strategists. The monarchy had acted decisively, but at what price? As public outrage faded and private damage settled in, Charles made one final move. A message to Camilla, one that changed everything again. A handwritten letter delivered by a trusted valet. In it, Charles finally broke his silence, not as king, but as husband. Those who saw it later described the note as devastating. It offered no reversal, only remorse. Camilla read it 3 times. Then she made a choice that may shape the monarchy's next chapter. The letter arrived quietly, slipped beneath the door of her private chamber during an afternoon when the palace stood unnaturally still. Charles's words were controlled, but heavy. He did not try to undo what had been done. He acknowledged her pain. He spoke of loyalty, of years standing together through scandal, exile, and survival. And then came a single line, later whispered about by palace aides with reverence. Some duties must come before devotion. It echoed louder than any public statement. It was not an apology. It was surrender to a crown that demanded sacrifice, even from the heart of its sovereign. Camilla sat in silence with the letter. One insider said she gripped it so tightly the paper bent in her hands. No one knows if she cried again. What is known is this. Soon after, she asked her staff to help her clear her belongings from the council chamber. Photographs, stationery, personal notes. Not in anger, not in protest, but with a quiet resignation that spoke louder than any outburst. The room where she once ruled with subtle authority was emptied of her presence in less than an hour. Within days, new whispers spread. Camilla had requested a sharply reduced public schedule. Appearances were reconsidered, events declined. Her calendar, once crowded with briefings and ceremonies, now showed blank spaces where influence once lived. It was not rebellion, and not retreat. It was withdrawal, intentional measured. Some inside the palace speculated that plans were already forming for a separate residence, distant enough from the political core, yet close enough to preserve appearances. Nothing confirmed, nothing denied. Then came the final mystery. Camilla wrote a letter of her own. No one knows its contents. It was sealed, delivered to the king, and never mentioned again. Some believe it was her farewell to power. Others think it was a final promise, never to forget what had been taken. Charles offered no comment. His aides refused to speak. And Camilla remained silent. She still holds the title of Queen Consort, but the true center of royal influence has shifted. And the monarchy, forever altered, will never be the same again. Thanks for reading. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.